During the Second World War, the Wehrmacht and SS overtook large parts of Europe in record tempo. The military superiority and competent command of the German army are often cited as reasons for the ability to advance this quickly. A topic that is covered less but is rather fascinating is the creation of an elite unit of German soldiers that went behind enemy lines, securing crucial strategic locations and sabotaging enemy holdouts. They would play a central role during Fall Gelb, the invasion of Western Europe, and Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia. The regular armed forces of Europe had an aversion towards anything associated with irregular warfare, but there were several German officers that thought in a more unorthodox manner when it came to warfare. One was Captain Theodor von Hippel, who served under General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck in German East Africa during the First World War. Lettow-Vorbeck used guerrilla tactics and irregular warfare and managed to keep at a standstill huge numbers of Allied troops until he capitulated in late 1918. His command was the only German force in the war not to be defeated in open combat. During the 1930s, Hippel persuaded Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, that he should set up an irregular warfare company, inspired by Lettow-Vorbeck's campaign. Hippel figured a special unit ought to be created that pushed far into enemy's territory, ahead of the German troops, and used methods that were, in Hippel's words, not those of a Prussian gentleman. These shock troops would stir chaos and divert attention from the front lines. Canaris agreed to Hippel's proposal and the unit was created, with its members consisting of volunteers. The majority were Germans from overseas territories that spoke foreign languages. The members ranged from Latin America to Sudeten, Volksdeutsche, Baltic and Volga Germans. In the summer of 1939, Hippel's number 1 construction training company, a so-called Company of Saboteurs in the West, was set up under Canaris' supervision, with Lieutenant Siegfried Gabert as the commander. A second company was formed in October 1939, consisting of mainly Romanian Germans from the Banat and Transylvania, Baltic Germans and Germans that settled in Palestine. This battalion was named Baulehr Battalion 800. Their permanent headquarters was based at an estate at Brandenburg-Havel, outside of Berlin, and because of their location, they were known as the Brandenburgers. The language skills of these troops would be in great demand as Nazi Germany expanded across Europe after September 1939. The troops were subject to grueling training routines that included marksmanship, bomb diffusion making, commando-style warfare, survival and camouflage skills. One of the techniques which made the Brandenburgers especially feared was silent killing. Their ability to sneak up and kill using steel wire, garroting their enemy, or using a razor-shaped knife. Canaris, however, much confidence he had in the special units, was determined they should comply with international law and not fight wearing enemy uniforms. Once the troops entered the combat phase of the operation, they ought to take off their disguise and fight as German troops. He reasoned that if they were captured, they would be treated as POWs instead of shot as spies. In theory. Anyway, both Canaris and Hippel agreed that the Brandenburgers ought to be known for their artfulness instead of force. Well, some people are aware of the false flag attack Hitler used in order to justify the war against Poland. Canaris fundamentally disagreed with this. It was the Sicherheitsdienst under Reinhard Heydrich's command that undertook the so-called Operation Himmler. The Brandenburgers did play a role in the invasion though. They crossed the Polish frontier in secret and led the way for the German assault troops, sappers and panzer units by securing bridges, roads, crossings, killing sentries and causing chaos behind enemy lines. Their role in the occupation of Denmark, the so-called Operation Weserübung, was to secure the bridges across the Little and Great Belt connecting Jutland on the mainland with Zealand, where the capital Copenhagen was located. It may not be surprising, but to the credit of the skill of this elite task force, that up until 1940 the enemies of Germany were barely aware of the Brandenburgers' existence. However, Fall Gelb, the invasion of France and the Low Countries, would change this, and after the whole of Western Europe would fall into German hands within a few weeks, the Brandenburgers, due to their operations, would become famous, or notorious, however you want to call it. The Brandenburgers were given several objectives during Fall Gelb, among which capturing and securing the railway bridge at Gennep, as this would open the road to Holland. The German offensive against the Netherlands depended on paratroopers dropped near the big cities, The Hague, Amsterdam and Rotterdam. Though these forces required support from German land forces as fast as possible, the Dutch planted explosives on the railway bridge in order to blow it up, and as such, it had to be seized. In order to keep the mission a secret, only a few officials knew about it. The Brandenburgers picked for this mission, all fluent in Dutch, did not even know what their mission was, as they were shipped to a training camp. On the 9th of May, the men of the company were told their mission was to secure the Gennep Bridge. Right before midnight, they set off across the frontier, led by the Dutch-speaking lieutenant, Wilhelm Walter, who had analyzed the terrain already. The group was wearing Dutch military police uniforms, and though their route was frequently patrolled by Dutch troops, they managed to evade detection and station themselves in the bushes near the bridge. Just before dawn, 2 German trains made their way slowly across the frontier, and the Dutch sentry stationed next to the railway line shouted for them to stop, firing warning shots in the air. The armored German train did not stop, however, and slowly continued its advance towards the bridge. 6 men in Dutch military police uniforms approached the bridge on the eastern bank, and before the Dutch guards had time to react, the disguised Brandenburgers overpowered them. Speaking Dutch fluently, the Brandenburgers took up the phone in the guardhouse and notified the other guards that they had picked up 4 suspects. The Dutch swallowed the bait, and the Brandenburgers advanced on the bridge, and it didn't take long for the Dutch guards on the western side of the bridge to capitulate once they realized other Dutch guards were already overpowered. The trains, filled with German troops, now upped the pace and sped into Holland. It marked the invasion of the Netherlands, and after 4 days of fighting, the Dutch would capitulate. After the Netherlands capitulated, the Queen and her government escaped to London. The Belgians continued to resist and flooded the Newport area, which stopped the German advance to the sea for a week. In order to prevent the Belgians from repeating this tactic by flooding the River Iser and preventing the Germans from moving onto Dunkirk, the Brandenburg Specialists were called. Equipped with a Belgian army bus, greatcoats and caps, they moved onto the bridge located near Ostend, but as they arrived, they were immediately fired upon by British troops. They had to wait until nightfall, crawl under the bridge inch by inch, and cut the detonation wires to the explosive packages placed on the side of the structure. Once the demolition charges were disabled, a corporal from the detachment opened fire at the guard's house, while a lieutenant threw grenades. The other 10 Brandenburgers now rushed across the bridge, seized the pump houses, and managed to prevent the Belgians from flooding the area. The German army could now march onto Dunkirk, partially thanks to the Brandenburgers. For their exploits in Belgium and the Netherlands, the Brandenburgers were among the most decorated units marching with the invading German armies. Hitler presented Iron Cross commendations to over 70% of the men that participated in these missions. It was in Russia where the Brandenburgers were used with greatest effect. Canaris had prepared operations against the Soviets, and through his station chief in Helsinki, Commander Alexander Salarius, he received a surplus stock of Soviet military material that the Finns had seized during the Winter War. It included uniforms, greatcoats, caps, weapons, even trucks and motorcycles. Just as in the West, disguised Brandenburgers had moved ahead of the German army, slipping over the frontier where they got into contact with Ukrainian and Belarusian partisans fighting against the Soviet occupiers. On the 22nd of June 1941, 0 hour, Operation Barbarossa would be set in motion, and the Brandenburgers would play a crucial role in the German advance into Russia. The Soviet front was notified by the noise of artillery and the bombings of Stuka airplanes once the operation took off. Border posts were captured and mysterious, unmarked trucks filled with soldiers in Red Army uniforms drove further east, securing the passage of the Army Group North towards Estonia and Leningrad through the securing of bridges. The southern front saw Heinz Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group advancing into a swamp. The panzers were stuck in a roadless area full of ponds, soggy earth and forests, so as you can guess, every road and bridge secured was crucial. Guderian requested the assistance of the Brandenburgers in order to secure such a bridge, held by the Soviets. The lieutenant in charge of the group wanted to attack the bridge, as the setting sun would blind the Soviet sentries. 2 trucks with retreating Soviet soldiers would travel across the bridge. The first one would go over, the second one would suffer a mechanical breakdown in the middle of the bridge. The lieutenant, speaking flawless Russian and having obtained an NKVD uniform, was perfect for the role. The operation began when Stukas made a mock attack on the bridge, which added credibility to the fleeing trucks. The NKVD officer started a discussion with the engineer officer as his troops defused the bombs on the bridge. Once the bombs were defused, they took off their uniform, as international law required, and engaged in a firefight. The panzer unit that was supposed to support them was held up by heavy enemy fire, and the Brandenburgers were in a dire situation until the Stukas returned unexpectedly and destroyed the Russian positions. The Brandenburgers were supposed to hold the bridge for 15 minutes. They ended up there for 2 hours, suffering heavy losses. The Panzer Division got all the glory. Another tale of the Brandenburgers in Russia is of a unit of 62 men under the command of Adrian von Völkersam, whom you may remember from the video covering Operation Panzerfaust. These troops penetrated deeper into Russia than any other German unit, disguised as men of the NKVD, and ran into retreating Red Army soldiers, using them to the unit's advantage. Using these Red Army soldiers, Völkersam and his unit moved behind enemy lines, occupying the Maikop oil fields without a shot being fired. There are more missions and operations the Brandenburgers embarked on, but that's a story for another time. Thank you for watching this video, and what is an event or a person from the Second World War that you would like to know more about and perhaps see a video of? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to this channel. See you next time.